Hey guys, so this video is just a quick rundown of my GoTimer plugin and what it does. The basic explanation is that it runs a countdown timer to your next Go button press based off the timings in a timecode recording. It has use for both non-timecode and timecoded shows. So I initially built it for the last tour I was on. Windows, go away. Nobody cares. For the last tour I was on, knowing that I was going to have to take off at some point on pretty short notice, and didn't want to leave a fill-in LD trying to learn 30 songs in a day's time. So basically, every night I would go in and I would do a timecode recording of my show, which, for those who don't know, it's just so Shift Store or MA Store gives you the record keyword, hit an empty timecode slot, and it starts recording whatever you're doing by internal timecode after whatever version that came out in 312, no, 322, whatever it is. So I would record the whole 2.5 hour show down that way, and then at the end of the night, I would have, including all my bump button presses on separate tracks, I would have a timecode recording that has all of my timing information for what I was doing that night. So I'd record that every night. I was storing them for future reference because I knew I was going to end up needing them. And so when it came time for the handover, instead of them having to have 30 songs down to the T, they just ran a macro that had a line in it that just tells it which executor and which time code to read the executor timing from, and ta-da. The way it worked out, actually, the replacement LD wasn't even able to come in until the day after I left. But with this, I was able to pass it off to the house lighting guy and have him run the show on 5 hours advance notice. So obviously it doesn't get down to the exact millisecond of when a cue is going to happen, but the idea is more for getting a sense of how many repeats might be left to the next cue, or how long or short to expect banter to be. I'll just give you a general idea of what you have coming up. You're obviously not trying to line up to the last frame of the timer. Like I was saying, all I had to do, I've got this one disabled for right now, is run the macro. Actually, let me restart the plugin engine so you can see how long it takes to load. So I hit that. It reads the time code and the the sequence down, gets all the information it needs on that, and then as I hit go through, we can see we've got, I'm running a blank here, it's giving me a timer to the next time I'm going to hit go. The great thing about it being reading from a timecode recording is that timecode isn't recording autofollows, which means these two autofollows that happened here weren't registered in the cue timing. It's only measuring from this cue down to this one. So you're not paying attention to a bunch of autofollows that aren't relevant to the next time you actually have to hit the go button. And if I hit, what was this? So yeah, and I've got it set up so that at the request of people online when I shared previews, that you could do multiple timers at once. The request was specifically for being able to do a separate timer for spot cues. So now we're able to have a whole separate timer running at the same time, and I'll get into the details of that later. So anyways, so you can see every time I hit go and I get to a new cue, it is updating this timer, telling me how far out from my next go button push I am. So there's, I guess, the basics of how it's running and use with a non-timecode show. So you don't have to be running a timecode show to take a timecode recording and be able to pass it off to somebody, or even if you're just using it for your own reminder, coming from rehearsals, maybe where you have somebody calling a specific timing to walking into the first show or something. That said, for timecode shows, it can be super handy when, you know, the obviously never going to happen situation of having to kill timecode mid-song happens. So you still have a reference for how far out your next cues are, especially if it's maybe like new music to you, too intricate to predict the cues accurately, or maybe your programmer didn't do a stellar job labeling things and you don't know what the fuck the cue labeled pretty does, or you've lost sense of the cue timing from not running it live for a while. Or maybe you are the show programmer and you want the safety net for the show you're passing off to the touring LD. As the LD, it'll let you maintain a timing reference in a situation that might be otherwise stressful, depending on how familiar you are with the show, when you have to pause it all of a sudden. As far as the process of running it, there's detailed explanations in documentation, which comes with the download, and can be found on the web page as well for the plugin. But it's been set up to run from a macro line rather than having a separate plugin for every combination of executor and timecode that you want to use, setting up a timecode line that tells the plugin which information to pull. So there's an demo macro line. It's also been set up so that it recognizes not just numbers but names, the same as you would entering things in the command line, and variables, so that if you have, the setup with a song load macro and a song start macro, you can just throw this into the song start one, and we could run this, for example, where the executor is just your song variable and executor 15 on that page. Or if it was, maybe if you have like a default lighting fader that's on a variable, you could do that as well. So it will be able to read numbers, names, and variables from the macro line. So there's an explanation of that. What else was? Right, as far as running multiple at once, it's set up so that you can run as many as you want. There's just a field that has to be changed for the name of it in each one. I haven't tried to push it with 10 million of them. I've run 3 at once, no issues. I was running 2 at once live, had no issues. It's every time a queue changes. Actually, I'll run it with this up right now. Oh, of course I did it when there's a freaking song load macro. Let's try that again. Okay, so there's the last point we were at. So it's, can I get one without a command? Okay, let's try this again. Last time. So all we have is 3 commands going. Off timer, assign the new timing to the timer, and GoTimer. It's not flooding your command line with a million macros, macro lines. I'm sure you guys have had much more intricate lines. In my fooling around, I found at about 300 commands a second. Solo is where the console starts to freak out, which was not for any kind of useful plugin. But anyways, being that it's only 3 commands at a time, it's super friendly even to networked sessions. When I was running it, I had a backup console as well as my PC networked in. I had no issues whatsoever running it. For those a little more concerned, it's running at about 15 frames per second in the background. I have in the past, sorry, just for comparison, the process of loading that 600 queue stack that you saw when I hit the top of this, it's a few tens of thousands of commands that are happening in that second and a half. So 15 commands a second isn't bogging down the processor at all. But I have in the past accidentally run infinite loops with no pauses on them. And it seems like after version 3.2 they set up the Lua engine so that it has a very restricted amount of processing power, which means that even if something was somehow to screw up on this and it started having no pauses whatsoever, it doesn't slow down the console. Once they made Lua publicly accessible, they made sure to make it as friendly and non-destructive as possible. So if you're concerned with how much processing power it's taking, I've got 2 of these running at once. Let's, just for shits and giggles, let's look at disk status. Workload, we're at 4%. So if that gives you any kind of an idea of what we're running at, and realistically, if I go over here, we'll go over here and off both of these and take a quick look, and we are running at still 4 or 5%, so it didn't change a damn thing. I think that's pretty much it as far as that. If there are any other questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to test anything in advance that anybody has in mind. So that's pretty much the whole thing. You can find it on my website, geoffadesigns.com, where there's also a download link for the documentation on how to use it. Feel free to hit me up on the contact form from there with any support questions or suggestions. And follow me on Facebook to keep up with any new nerdiness I may post. Hope you enjoy it, and happy programming.